Good evening. Today we're going to talk about abstinence. What does the Torah say about the idea of abstinence, of making vows to refrain from certain permitted things in life? And it's obviously connected to this week's Torah portion. And now this week's Torah portion, Moshe is speaking to the people and he tells them as follows. When a person makes a vow to God or makes an oath to prohibit themselves, they shall not violate their word. Whatever came out of their mouth, they shall do. So there's a clear directive, a clear mitzvah in the Torah, that when you make a vow, you have an obligation to fulfill that vow. When you take a vow with God's name, and you say, I am hereby taking upon myself that I'm going to do this particular thing or not do this particular thing, it becomes a prohibition. It becomes a solid requirement to follow the words that you've said. Unless if there's certain, a very strong reason why you're unable to fulfill your vow, there's certain processes you can go to, which is what this week's Torah portion talks about, how you can undo the vow and how you can go back. But it's a process. Otherwise, you took a vow, you have an obligation to keep that vow and to follow what you said you're going to do. Now, why would a person be taking a vow? What's the purpose of a vow? What's this idea that I'm going to go and say that I'm going to become a vegetarian and not eat meat anymore? What's this all about? Why are you taking on a vow that you're not going to eat meat? So the Maimonides goes into this idea at length, and he says as follows. When a person takes vows in order to improve their character traits and correct their conduct, such vows are considered both commendable and praiseworthy. So Maimonides says it's a very good thing. It's a good idea. Sometimes a person has certain traits, they have certain characteristics that they're trying to fix. They feel like there's a problem. And so what they do is they'll make a vow to put themselves on the right path, to give themselves the ability to overpower their strong desires. Right? So for example, somebody who's having a problem with drinking too much, whether it means that they start driving with their car afterwards, putting people's lives in danger, or just doing things that hurt themselves or others, and it's becoming a problem, and you have a drinking problem. So one solution is you say, you know what, I'm making a vow, I am not going to touch another drop of alcohol again. I'm not going to have anything at all. I'm not going to touch it because for me it's poison. I'm going to stay away. Now, there's no prohibition against drinking a little alcohol. We'll talk more about that later on at the end of the class, the particulars of alcohol. But there's no prohibition against having a l'chaim or against having a little, enjoying a little drink. It's fine. But certain people, they know that they have a tendency that's pulling them in a certain direction, and so they need to give themselves a boost by making a vow, by putting a prohibition on it that I'm not going to touch it, I'm not going to do this at all. The same thing if someone is a glutton. They have a problem that they're too excited about a good steak, so therefore they take a vow upon themselves. I'm going to become a vegetarian. I'm not going to eat meat anymore. Or any other thing, whether it has to do with money or any other different character trait that a person can have that he feels is something he needs to fix. He needs to go in another direction. He takes a vow for himself. All of these are legitimate paths in the service of Hashem. Concerning such vows and others like them, our sages said, vows are a safeguard for restraint. So Maimonides says it's a good idea sometimes to take a vow upon yourself. Even though such practices are a form of divine service, a person should not make a habit of taking vows of self-denial or become accustomed to them. Instead, they should simply refrain from things that are appropriate to avoid without making a vow. So he does say, better, if you can avoid it, don't go around taking vows about everything. But it is a proper service at the right time, at the right place, to take a vow to refrain from doing things that you shouldn't do. Sounds great. A vow is a positive thing to do. Problem is, there's always other views. Let's look in the Torah and other places, see what others say about this idea of taking vows, and see if they agree with this idea that the Rambam, the Maimonides, is saying. Let's look in the Talmud, not the regular Talmud, but the Jerusalem Talmud, where it says as follows. Rabbi Dimi said in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, are the Torah prohibitions not enough that you seek to prohibit other things? So Rabbi Dimi is saying, in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, what are you talking about? We have 613 mitzvot in the Torah. We have a long list of things that are prohibited. You're not allowed to have pork. You're not allowed to have shellfish. You're not allowed to have wool and linen together. You're not allowed to have certain, relationships. You can't. There's so many things that are prohibited. There's a long list. The list is not long enough for you. You have to make it longer. You have to add more ideas to it. You think Hashem is not good enough at coming up with mitzvot. You have to come up with more prohibitions. What is this about? So Rabbi Dimi is saying that no, it's a bad idea. Don't take vows. Don't take on additional prohibitions. Not only that, Maimonides himself says it. The same Maimonides that we just read a moment ago. Let's read what Maimonides says in a different place. In a different section of the Mishnah Torah, Maimonides writes as follows. A person might reason, since envy, desire, and the pursuit of honor and similar traits are harmful and can lead a person astray, I will distance myself from them completely by adopting the opposite extreme. Such a person might decide not to eat meat, drink wine, marry, live in a comfortable home, or wear fine clothing. They may choose to wear sackcloth and coarse wool like priests of idol worship do. Right? In other words, they may choose a life of abstinence to go be a monk living up in the hills where you have no pleasures in life and you don't involve yourself in worldly matters. You're living a holy life. This is also an improper path, and it is forbidden to follow it. The Rambam Maimonides says this is not just not recommended. It is forbidden. This is not the path of Torah. Anyone who adopts this approach is called a sinner, as implied by the Torah's description of the Nazarite, for whom atonement is required. Let's take a moment just to remind, if anyone's not familiar, what is a Nazarite? A Nazarite is someone who takes upon himself a vow, where he says, I'm going to abstain from certain things, mostly grape products. Not going to have any grapes, not going to have any wine, or any product that contains any part of the grape within it. Also, they're not going to cut their hair, and they're not going to become impure. They're going to live a life of purity. There were many, many famous Nazarites in the Torah. The most famous is Samson, Shimshon HaGibor, right? The famous Samson, he was a Nazarite. He was someone who was forbidden from having any wine or any wine products. Now, there are different types of a Nazir, of a Nazarite. The first one is like Samson, someone who says, for the rest of my life, Samson wasn't even the rest of his life, it was even before he was born. He started with it. But for the rest of my life, I am going to be a Nazir. I'm not going to have any more wine. This person can never have wine in the whole life, unless they go to a rabbi and get it taken care of, take the vow. They undo the vow. But as long as the vow is there, they're not allowed to have any wine. But sometimes a person can put a time limit to it. You say, I'm going to be a Nazarite for 1 year. I'm going to be a Nazarite for 3 years. For 30 days, it means that it's the minimum. The minimum is 30 days. You set up a time and you say, this is the time limit. For this amount of time, I'm going to be a Nazir. So during that time, they keep all the rules of the Nazir. They don't cut their hair. They can't have any wine. They can't become tameh. They can't become impure. Once their time is up, when they hit the end of the time that they said, they would travel to the Bet HaMikdash, to the temple. There at the temple, they would get a haircut, cut off all their hair, and they would bring certain sacrifices and end their period of being a Nazarite. What's interesting, though, is when the Nazir would finish his period of being a Nazir, and he brought his sacrifices, amongst the sacrifices that he brought was a sin offering. He brought a karban, a sacrifice for a sinner. So now you say, hold on a second, what did this man do wrong? He's doing a mitzvah in the Torah. It's a mitzvah in the Torah, but we're coming a Nazir. And he does it because he wants to make himself holier. He wants to live a holy, pure life. And therefore he says, I'm going to abstain from alcohol, I'm going to abstain from grape products, and I'm going to stay pure. This is a beautiful thing. Many holy, great tzaddikim, including the great prophet Samuel, Shmuel, was a Nazarite as well. It's a beautiful thing. Why is he bringing a sin offering? Yet we see that he also has to atone for something. And that's what Maimonides is talking about over here. The sages explain, if a Nazarite who abstains only from wine requires atonement, how much more so someone who deprives themselves of many permissible things. So making vows and depriving yourself from prohibitions, this is not the way of Torah. This is not the proper path for a Jew. Therefore, our sages instructed that a person should refrain only from what the Torah itself has forbidden, and should not prohibit additional permissible things through vows or oaths. As they said, it is not enough for you what the Torah has already forbidden, that you seek to forbid additional things for yourself. Right? This is the quote from the same Talmud that we read previously. The same principle applies to those who fast excessively. This is not considered the proper path, for our sages discouraged a person from afflicting themselves through constant fasting. Regarding all such forms of excessive self-denial, Solomon warned, do not be overly righteous and do not be excessively wise. Why should you destroy yourself? So the same Maimonides that before told us that it is a good thing, that if you have something you need to correct, you should take upon yourself a vow. Now he's coming along and saying, hey, don't take vows. It's not proper. What are we supposed to do? What's the right message here? Another quote from the Talmud, again from the Talmud, from the Jerusalem Talmud. Rabbi Chizkiah said in the name of Rav, a person will eventually be called to account for all that they saw with their eyes and did not eat. We're going to hold you accountable for the things that you didn't enjoy. Rabbi Elazar took this to heart and would save up small coins so he could eat of every new thing once a year. Every time the new season arrived, the new fruits came out, he says, I'm going to go have a little bit of everything. I'm going to have a peach, I'm going to have a plum, I'm going to have an apricot, one of everything. So I can make the blessing, the shechianu, and I can enjoy it. And you won't be able to hold it against me that I didn't enjoy the fruits that Hashem gave me. So here we have these two perspectives. One perspective is it's appropriate to put yourself on the right path by abstaining and by making vows. The other extreme says, no, don't make any vows, don't prohibit anything. And not only that, you actually have a requirement to try everything, to participate, to enjoy the different things that Hashem provided for you. It's actually a requirement to have a little bit of everything. So what's the correct path? Which way should we go? And so the Rebbe explains, depends who you are, depends on the situation. You have to understand the specifics of the situation. There's a time where you need to make a vow, you have to abstain. And there's a time where you have to participate, you have to have part of it. There is a person who lives a life where materialism is here for the purpose of elevating. I enjoy the physicality, the material things in this world because I want to elevate it and bring it to a higher level. I want to connect this food to my Torah study and bring it up to its source, reconnect it with the energies from God. A beautiful thing. But then you have someone else who doesn't make that spiritual connection. You know why I'm eating this food? Because I like it. I'm eating it because it tastes good, because I'm enjoying it. That's why I'm eating it. Not for any spiritual ideas. So if a person is a materialistic person, a person that is too connected with the physicality, then it's not a good thing to enjoy worldly matters. On the contrary, you have to hold yourself back. You need to abstain from getting involved in it because it's only going to drag you down. It's not going to pick you up. It's not going to help. And the other, it's actually going to be a hindrance to your service. So for such a person, a vow is a good thing. For such a person, it actually is a good idea to make a vow, to abstain from this, to keep yourself from getting involved in these things that are not going to be good. There is a saying amongst Hasidim, which this saying was originally taught by the Alter Rabbi, the first Chabad Rabbi, the author of the Tanya. The Alter Rabbi taught, he said in Yiddish, we'll say it in English, what is forbidden is forbidden. Right? Something that's not allowed, clearly not allowed. We know that it's forbidden. And what is permitted is unnecessary. Just because you're allowed to doesn't mean you have to. Just because that chocolate bar is kosher doesn't mean you have to eat it. Doesn't mean it's good for you just because it's kosher, just because you're allowed to eat it. So not everything that you're allowed to do you need to do. Yes, you could if you want, but it doesn't mean it's appropriate. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. We see a similar idea mentioned in the Talmud. In the Talmud it says, an unlearned person should not eat meat. What do you mean unlearned person should not eat meat? Does that mean that meat is forbidden for someone who is not learned? Does that mean someone who's not a Torah scholar, it is forbidden for them to eat meat? No, it is not forbidden. And to prove this, there's a very simple way we can see that the meat is not forbidden. Because if someone eats food that is forbidden, you don't make a bracha. If someone's having a pork sandwich, you say, what bracha is a pork sandwich? There's no bracha. There's no bracha on pork. It's not kosher. There's no bracha. You don't make a blessing on something that is not kosher if it's forbidden. An unlearned person who eats meat, do they make a blessing or not? Absolutely, they make a blessing. So the meat is not forbidden. It's not prohibited. Yet the Talmud says you shouldn't eat meat. So what does this mean? Like we were saying before, the purpose of us eating the meat, the purpose of us enjoying any food, is for the purpose of elevating the food. The food wants to be elevated, wants to reconnect with the godly spark that is within it. It wants to be lifted up and brought to a higher level. When you take food, you make a blessing on the food, and then you eat the food with the right intention, and you use that energy to continue your godly service. You go and study Torah with that energy. You go and help somebody. You go and do a favor for another person. You go and build a sukkah. You do something holy with that energy. Then that food that you ate becomes elevated. It moves up. It gets connected to its holy godly spark. And that is the purpose of eating the food. That's why we have meat in the first place. That's what the meat is there for. That's what it's created for. That's what you are created for. To take that meat and elevate it through using the energy in the right way. This is what the food wants. This is the whole purpose of the food. But what happens if you don't do that? What happens if a person eats the food because they like it, because they enjoy it? I'm eating this meat because I like steak. It tastes good. That's why I'm eating it. Not because I want to go study Torah. Not because I want to go use the energy for something good. Yeah, I made a blessing. I did everything right. I didn't meet it together with milk. I kept it kosher. I did everything right. Didn't break any rules. No prohibitions. But yet, you completely ruined the whole experience. You took the greatest potential and you threw it in the garbage. You took the potential of this food to lift itself up, to lift you up, to do something holy. And instead, what did you do? You took the food and you dragged it down with you. You used the food to go down to a lower level, to become more coarse, more materialistic, more physical. You use it to satisfy physical desires. That's not holy. That's not pure. So this is what the Talmud is saying, that somebody who does not have the ability to use the energy, to utilize the food in the right way, such a person has no business eating meat. If you can't be responsible to eat the meat properly for the right purpose, don't touch the meat. Why would you ruin the meat for no reason? And that's what the Talmud is saying when it says that an unlearned person should not eat meat. There's a story told of the holy Baal Shem Tov, where something that he would do actually many times. The Baal Shem Tov would sit with his students, and he would they would sit in a circle or stand in a circle, and he would put his arms on their shoulders and tell them all to hold hands with each other, and they would make a circle. And doing this, they would kind of create this circle of holiness where an energy would course through them, and they would see visions of the Baal Shem Tov. They would get to experience these visions as well. There's different stories that take place in this setting, and this is one of them, where one time the Baal Shem Tov told the students to come in a circle, and he put his arm on the two students next to him. They put their hands on each other, and they closed their eyes, and what did they see? They suddenly see a very interesting scene. They see a cow, an ox, and the ox is sitting at a table and he's eating. But the ox is dressed like a chassid. He's wearing, the black coat, the big strimel. Anybody seen the big furry strimel? And he looks like a holy cow, a holy ox, and he's sitting and eating. This is the view that they get. After they finished the experience, so they open their eyes and they don't know what they just see. What was that about? What kind of holy ox did they just vision? So the Baal Shem Tov explained, what you just saw was actually a human being. Not just any human being. He was a great man. He's a holy man who is celebrating Shabbat. This man is celebrating Shabbat, doing the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah on Shabbat to eat. A mitzvah to eat. To have cholent on Shabbat is a mitzvah. He's sitting and enjoying his cholent. Beautiful thing. But why is he eating the cholent? Is it for Shabbat? Is it for the sanctity of Shabbat? Is it to give him the energy to do more good? No. You know why he was eating cholent? Because he likes the taste of cholent. He was enjoying the cholent because he likes cholent. So at that moment in heaven, he wasn't a human being. He was an ox. He was an ox. He was the cholent. That's what he was. He was a piece of cholent himself. That's what happens when we live our lives in such a way where we don't put our focus, our energy in the right place and understand the real purpose behind the things that we're doing. And this whole concept can be extended further beyond the idea of oaths, but really extended from the rabbis to us as well. People often ask, there's a question that comes up all the time to rabbis on a regular basis. Rabbi, why are there so many rules? So many things that you can do, when in previous generations they were holy special people, they didn't have such rules. There was nobody making up these rules in the earlier generations. As we go on, we keep adding more rules. What's the problem? Our ancestors weren't holy enough for you. You have to add more. You have to make things more complicated. The rabbis have to always come up with more problems. What's this all about? It's a very valid question. Why do we add more? I mean, this really happens throughout the ages, but there was one time period where they really added a lot of things. And that was the time period of the second temple, the second Bet HaMikdash. In the first Bet HaMikdash, there were not so many rules. Obviously, there's the rules of the Torah. There are certain obligations, certain things. But the rabbis were not so stringent in so many areas. Came the second temple, and suddenly they wrote up new rules, lots and lots of rules. Many rules came out during that period. What's this about? Why are we changing things? Why do we have to live in this way? The answer is that during the first temple, the people were holy. The people were living holy lives. They were holy people. They were involved in their Torah, and they were living a holier life, and they themselves, they experienced life in a different way. The first temple was a very special place. There were extreme miracles and amazing things that happened in the first temple that never took place in the second temple. The second temple was missing that special spark. It was missing that special holiness. There was no ark. There was no ark in the second temple. And many things were missing from the second temple. It was never the same. And being that it was never the same, the people were not the same. The people were on a much lower level spiritually during the second temple period. That being the case, their spiritual challenges were much harder. Therefore, they required more safeguards. They required more protection to keep them from stepping overboard. And so what the rabbis did was they instituted many rules and constraints and protections and safeguards in order to protect us from doing something that we shouldn't do. For example, the Torah says on Rosh Hashanah you have to blow shofar. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. Rosh Hashanah you blow shofar. Now, what happens if it's Shabbat? Doesn't matter. On Shabbat you're not allowed to blow shofar. But it's Rosh Hashanah. The Torah says Rosh Hashanah you blow shofar. So really, we should blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah, even if it's Shabbat, as it will be this year. This year, Rosh Hashanah is going to be on Shabbat, just a couple of months. And the first temple, they blew Rosh Hashanah on Shabbat. It came the second temple, and a great sage by the name of Rabbi, he made a new decree. He says a new rule. When Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, we do not blow shofar. Only in the temple they blow shofar. Out of the temple, we are not going to blow on Shabbat. What's this all about? Why did he make this new rule? Because he said, here's what's going to happen. A person, he needs to hear shofar. It's Rosh Hashanah. He knows he has to hear shofar. He has a shofar, but he doesn't know how to blow it. He doesn't know how to use it properly. He's trying. It's not working. He doesn't know what to do. So what do? You have a problem. Take the shofar to the rabbi. Ask the rabbi, can you blow it for me? Show me how to blow it. Fix this. Help me out over here. I got to hear the shofar. The problem is, on Shabbat, we're forbidden from carrying outside. So now he's going to take the shofar and carry it through the streets. That's forbidden. He's breaking the rules of Shabbat by carrying the shofar in the streets. Therefore, Rabbi said, no shofar on Rosh Hashanah. We're banning it completely. This is just one example of many, many examples where we see that the rabbis enacted certain safeguards to protect us from doing other things. Just because we mentioned the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, I want to finish by saying we celebrate Rosh Hashanah for 2 days. Even in the second temple as well. By that time already, they were celebrating Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, even in Israel. This is the one holiday that even in Israel is 2 days. And so although we're not going to blow shofar on the first day on Shabbat, we will blow on the second day, on Sunday. So that's when we're going to blow the shofar this year, on the Sunday. Okay. So in the first temple, there was no concern that anybody's going to carry the shofar through the streets. Because in the first temple, there were holier people. They would never do such a thing. It wouldn't happen to them. Only when it came to the second temple, when we're living in a spiritually challenging time, a time where we are on a different level, our lives are on a different level, therefore it becomes a challenge to keep up with that. And that's why when it comes to time of the second temple, that's when we start having to enact new decrees and new rules and new regulations. And this continues throughout the ages. And that's why you'll see till today, as we keep getting further and further from the first temple. Thankfully, we're getting closer to Mashiach as well. But during this time, we're going lower and lower in spiritual stature. And that, therefore, we have to keep having new rules and new restrictions and new regulations to make sure that we stay on the straight path. But the Rebbe says it's not just about the generations. It also is within a person's life himself. One person within their life, you go through stages. You go through different stages in your life where there are some periods in your life that you're more materialistic. There are other stages in your life that you're more spiritual. And as we live through these different stages, we need to understand what sort of restrictions we have to have on us during that time. We have to understand that at this point in time, you're living in a more spiritually vulnerable state. Therefore, you have to take on more safeguards. Whereas another person or another stage in your life, you're a little bit more spiritually in tune. Therefore, you don't have to have as many safeguards. It's within each person, you go through these different stages in your life. One of the things that people say about Chabadniks, or really Hasidim in general, people say they're a bunch of drunks. Anybody ever heard this idea before? Not so much today. It was more in the previous generation. Go back some years, it was more of a common thing that people would say. Where does this idea come from? Why do people say that they're a bunch of drunks? And the truth is, there's some truth to it. Every one of these stories, always something to it, right? There's something, an element of truth. The idea is like this. Chabad comes from Russia. That's where the movement originated. In Russia, drinking, first of all, is very common. It's a very common thing for people to gather and drink. in Russia and Ukraine. And Hasidim and Chabad in particular, there's a very strong emphasis on joy, on singing and serving God with an emotion and warmth and happiness. This is the way we're meant to serve God. And we're meant to, the way it was celebrated at that time was they would gather together. The people would gather together. They would say l'chaim on a cup of mashka, a cup of alcohol. And they would sit together and they would sing and they would farbrang together and they would dance and they would give each other blessings and they would have a happy, joyful life together. This was a way of breaking down barriers and connecting with people on a more intimate level, a way of having a connection using a little bit of alcohol as a tool to bind people together. And this was very common back in Russia and Ukraine. It was a very common thing. But over time, we've crossed the Atlantic and arrived in America and other places. Here in America, things are a little bit different. And so it came a point in 1963, the Rabbi made a new rule amongst Chabad. He says, I'm making a new rule about drinking alcohol. He says, first of all, and this has already been spoken about before, the idea of we have to, alcohol is not a good thing. It's not something to be celebrated. We don't want to be a bunch of drunks. That's not the idea. We have to have moderation. You have to keep it down to a more moderate number. But now the Rebbe said we're making a rule here. The rule is anybody under 40 years old may not drink more than 4 shots. You're limited to 4 shots, which together comes out to about a half a cup. 4 shots of hard alcohol until you're 40 years old. After you're 40, you should still have moderation, but the rules are off. So we see here that there is a different periods in life. The Rabbi said there's a period, first of all, times have changed. There's different periods in time. You had the time previously where it was more common, it was more accepted, it was a more normal thing to do, and it wasn't as much of a problem because people didn't end up in the same consequences. First of all, they weren't driving cars, right? That's a big thing. Once you start driving a car, mixing cars and alcohol, that's a big problem. That problem they didn't have back in Russia. But in addition, people were living in a more spiritual state where it wasn't causing as many problems by drinking some alcohol. Whereas in our generation, as we come living here in America, living in a different place, and living with a different spiritual inspiration and style, the consequences of drinking alcohol here is more complicated. And therefore, the Rebbe said things at times have changed, and we need to practice restraint. Furthermore, within a person's life himself, when you're under 40, you're not developed yet. You're not spiritually mature yet to be able to hold your alcohol in the same way and to know when you're still able to drink or not, right? So therefore, under 40, there has to be a hard rule. Over 40, we'll leave a little bit more room, a little more wiggle room where you can decide for yourself. You can be your own character judge to see if you're still able to safely handle a little bit more or not. And so this is an example of something that changes from generation to generation and also changes within a person himself. A person himself can have different stages in life where it becomes prohibited or permitted based on where you're holding in life. There are also certain things that, certain materialistic things that seem to be a negative, but there's room for it to be positive as well. Alcohol, by the way, was one of them. But let's talk about another one. Back in the 60s, which really started early with radio, it became more common. People started having radios and television. And amongst religious Jews, especially television, was considered very, very negative. Growing up, we never had a television in our home. Until today, I've never had a television in my home. Unfortunately, today with computers, we have everything that the television had in our homes as well. And our phones, we have it in our pockets. But television was always a big no-no for any religious home. In Chabad, we also were very particular, as we said, very particular about not having a television in our home. But at the same time, the Rebbe said everything has to have an element of holiness within it too. Television wasn't created for the purpose of bringing impurities into your house. That's not why God created a concept of television. God created a concept of television because there's an element of good within it. What is the element of good? We have to use the power of radio and television to broadcast good things, to broadcast Torah and mitzvot, to broadcast goodness to the world around us. And that's why, starting in the 1960s already, I believe, the Rebbe started encouraging somebody to go and teach Tanya on the radio. There was a man by the name of Rabbi Yosef Weinberg, where he began Tanya classes on the radio for hundreds, thousands of people to be listening to the Tanya on the radio, using the medium of radio to teach Torah to people. Later with television, the Rebbe's address would often be broadcast on television. I remember back in, I think it was 1990, when we gathered, it was on Hanukkah, and it was an amazing moment, where they set up a satellite connection. That time it was like crazy technology. Today you have a Zoom call, you can have on WhatsApp and say everyone can be there. It's not a big deal. Back then it was a huge idea. It was a huge thing that we had a satellite broadcast, a connection between New York, Australia, England, France, and Moscow. I believe those were the places that were involved. Paris and Moscow. These were the different locations. Oh, and Israel. And they had live broadcasts from each of these places where there was kids gathered in each of these places. And together we lit the menorah in different parts of the world. And it was all being broadcast on television. It was like this huge event. It was called Hanukkah Live. You check it up. It's been recorded. It's all out there. They did it another time as well. But this was the first time, and especially including Moscow at that time. This is 1990. So this is just after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Soviet Union. It was a very, very interesting time. And this was how the Rebbe would utilize the technology and say the technology is there for a good purpose. Don't just throw it out the window. Don't just destroy it and say it's tuma, it's impure, it's unholy, get rid of it. No. Find the element of good and use it. Find out what its real purpose in creation is and make it, connect with it, and use it to bring more goodness into the world. To finish off with one more idea. When it comes to mitzvot in general, when does a Jewish boy start having the obligation to keep the mitzvot? Generally speaking, it's 13 years old when you come bar mitzvah. But there is one exception to that. There is one mitzvah in the Torah that begins not at 13, but at 12. We start a whole year earlier. You're biblically required to keep this mitzvah an entire year early. This is the mitzvah of vows. If a 12-year-old boy makes a vow, and they test him to make sure that he knows what he's saying, and if he understands the vow, he made a real vow and he understood it and he meant it, then he is obligated to keep that vow, just as if he was a older than bar mitzvah, an adult male, or anything else. It becomes an obligation for him from the age of 12. Why does it start early? Everything else begins at 13. Why does this mitzvah of vows start a year earlier at 12? What's the idea here? And so the Rebbe again taught us that the explanation is very simple. It's teaching us the responsibility, the requirement to have safeguards, to have boundaries. When you're preparing to begin doing the mitzvot, when you're preparing to have your bar mitzvah, you're celebrating your bar mitzvah, you should know it doesn't start at the door. It doesn't start at 13. You have to start previously. You have to start getting ready. You have to know that the safeguards are there from the beginning. And therefore, we're going to set up a safeguard for you right now, telling you that this idea of safeguards, the idea of oaths, begins from the age of 12. We're not going to wait till 13. We're going to start right now when you're 12 years old. Now is when it already begins, where we start teaching you that there's a minimum requirement to have some safeguards, to have some self-restraint, to prepare you for being an adult. There was a boy who sent the Rebbe a letter asking the Rebbe for a blessing. This boy was 11 years old. He was going to turn 12 soon. And his 12th birthday was going to be in summer camp. It was in summer. He's going to go to camp. And so he asked the Rebbe for a blessing for his birthday. And so the Rebbe responded as follows. You certainly know that the biblical obligation to observe the mitzvahs begins at the age of 13. The sages, however, instituted the obligation of education before that age. Each child according to his level of development. There is one exception. The mitzvah of vows, whose Torah obligation begins at age 12, when the child has reached sufficient maturity to understand the significance of a vow. The concept of a vow is that a person voluntarily forbids themselves something that is otherwise permitted. The lesson from this is that Hasidim are expected to conduct themselves not only according to the strict requirement of Jewish law, but also beyond the letter of the law. As my father-in-law, the Rabbi, would say, what is forbidden, and even when something is permitted, one should still ask whether it is necessary. This approach is relevant to the observance of all mitzvot that become obligatory at age 13. The Torah itself points to this by introducing the concept of vows before the full obligation to observe the rest of the mitzvot begins. And the Rebbe concluded, since you are about to turn 12, when the laws of vows become relevant to you, you should be careful not only to avoid what is forbidden, but also to think carefully even about things that are permitted. May you grow to be a chassid, a God-fearing Jew, and a Torah scholar. Since you are now going to summer camp, you should make an effort to positively influence the other boys there, to help them become complete chassidim, or at the very least to bring them closer to the path of chassidut. So the Rebbe here is reminding us of our obligations, of understanding that we need to have safeguards. We need to put something in place. We need to sometimes give ourselves vows. We need to sometimes prohibit certain things in order to boost our own spiritual level, to bring us to a place where we're able to use our ability to refine the world, to bring the world to a higher level, to connect materialism with godliness. That is our ultimate purpose in this world. As long as we're able to do that, it's great. We got to use it. But if we're not able to, if we're falling into the trap of the materialism ourselves, we have to abstain. And that is the message from this week's Torah portion.